Słuchaj.
Słuchaj. Słuchaj. Słuchaj. Słuchaj. Słuchaj. Słuchaj.
Słuchaj.
Gier. Podcast sławiący kulturę muzyki do gier wideo.
GameMusic.pl
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 Good evening and welcome to the first day of Digital Dragons. I hope you're enjoying talks so far. I'm very happy to be here. I'm glad there are so many audio-related talks on this year's conference. I'm glad that the sound design is back on the menu after 2 years absence on Digital Dragons. And without further ado, I want to invite you to my talk, What to Expect and How to Talk to Your Sound Person, Developer's Guide to the Audio. Now, before I start the actual talk, I want to introduce myself. My name is Michał Korniewicz. I'm currently an audio lead in Anshar Studios. I'm leading a team of 5 sound designers, including myself, on various different projects. And the project which is closest to our hearts, and it's right around the corner, is Game Deck, a narrative RPG with a focus on branching and a really unique game. And be sure to check it out. It's right around the corner. September 16th it will be out. Couple more words about myself. I'm a game audio professional. I've been working now for more than 6 years in the industry, and I've worked in a multitude of different positions. I'm both composer and sound designer to start. I worked remote on the small outsourcing contracts. I worked as an in-house lead of the team. I worked as a one-man crew, doing all kind of stuff. I worked on mobile titles and on PC releases and consoles, together more than 24 commercially released products. And that really gave me a lot of perspective of different dynamics between audio specialists and game developers. And now this talk is something else for me. Like usually the audio talks and all the past talks of mine were circling around post-mortem of games, either showcasing a kick-ass soundtrack or talking about intricate audio systems that we've created. This talk focuses on the soft side of skills, soft side of that game developer audio specialist relationship, and I wanted to talk about it for a long time, and I'm really happy and thankful that Digital Dragons allowed this to happen this year. Now, the main goal and the main reason I want to talk about it, I see a huge potential in the game audio scene. I'm also a co-founder of Warsaw Game Audio, which is the biggest collective of audio professionals in Poland, and we all try to help each other and try to raise our level and quality of work. And now, I've heard a lot of stories from my colleagues, from my peers. I heard a lot of stories from various developers, and I feel there's a need to bolster how we communicate, how audio specialists and game developers communicate. So that talk, if you're a person that is either hiring sound designers or composers, or you work in production and you work with audio specialists, or you're an audio director, or really any kind of individual that work with audio on a daily basis, there will be a lot of topics that you might find very useful and interesting, I hope. We'll talk definitely about the communication, because a lot of issues resolves around that. We'll talk about types of audio jobs in game dev, because there is some confusion who you need and who you don't need for certain tasks. We'll touch on the topic of whether it's better to have such a specialist in-house or on a remote contract. We'll talk briefly about the tools and resources that allow sound designers and composers to thrive. Then we'll touch on the very interesting topic, HR and recruitment of said specialists, and especially if you're hiring your first or your second, you're in early days of working with game audio and you're just learning that, and you don't have already an audio specialist in your team that can help you with it. I think you'll find that part of the talk very useful. And last but not least, we'll touch on this audio and programming dynamic on implementation side, but not from technical point of view, but rather from production point of view. And there is a certain trap there that I really want to talk about. And then we'll have a QA session, which will finally be a live portion of the event, because
this is a pre-recorded message.
Let's start with communication. And before I dive into details, most issues coming from the communication problems are caused by one thing. And there's one certain rule, and it really applies to any other dynamic. It's not specific to game audio and game development discussion. Just don't be an asshole. Okay, first and foremost, and this is at the root of a lot of problems. A lot of developers look at audio as a final addition to their game, something that's taken care of very late in the production, and something that's like a sprinkle on top of a ready game. And the feeling is that this is an audio development team, and this is a sound, audio, music outsource that is in addition, but aside from the team. And the same thing, when I talk to my colleagues and my peers, I often hear the term client. I did it for my client, right? And I really believe it's not a good way. It's not the way to achieve the best possible audio and the great sounding games. I think that this comes when we see ourselves as a part of the team and we work as one. And it's not game dev and audio, we are all game developers after all. We just handle different parts of it. And the discrepancy is huge. And there's still a lot of companies work with outsourcers that only deliver assets. And they only deliver assets based on sent videos and briefs that the game designer or CEO may write for them. And it's not a good way. It's not a good way to work. First and foremost, the important part is the implementation of sounds. And hopefully and thankfully, I know this for a fact that it's more and more common, more and more companies and developers know this and accept this, that you gotta have a sound specialist or audio specialist that's implementing sounds and implementing music, not just throwing assets at you and you leave implementation, plugging the sounds in the game for level designers or scripters or whomever. But that allows so much more. Like, implementation is something to put out there because it's very, very important. But just being a part of the team, instead of watching a video or playing a part of the game, which is mightily important, to play the game repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly before you start making sounds, during you're making sounds, when you think you're finished, still play the game, listen to it. But then sound designer or composer can talk to the design, can talk to the programmers, can to the artists, to animators. All their stuff really influence our craft and our final product, and we just have a deeper understanding on what to do. So even if the sound designer is not proactive, even composer is not proactive and not taking all those details from you, just shower them with all you can, because it's gonna be so much more as the final product comes along. And something that gets overlooked in most part, and I know a lot of colleagues of mine are that way, are not only audio specialists, they are game developers. And what I mean by that, they play games, they analyze them, not only sound, but the games as a whole. And in discussions, in general discussions, they can add more than just the final sound at the end. They can influence things in a positive way, and they should be treated as such. And trust me, you'll thank me, your game will sound better and your whole team will benefit. Now, second thing is something that's unchangeable. It's audio plays in a production pipeline, which is at the very, very end, right? There's no other way about it. And there are certain problems connected to it. The thing that is really problematic is that any change to design, animation, code, whatever, to VFX, it has a chance of breaking the audio. Then you have to tweak the audio, you have to, or maybe redo it completely. The solution to it lies in the anticipation. Same way as a programmer anticipates what the designer might need in the future when said programmer is creating a tool for them and tries to not having to rewrite the code over and over again, rather just expand it in certain places. Same can happen with sound. And, very experienced sound designers and very experienced composers will anticipate it, account for it, and go in that way. But not every will do it, but you can still help him. Whatever your role is, and especially if you're a producer and you have a great overview of things, you can give an audio specialist a set of informations which consists of everything that is either not final or might change, or from your experience it's possible that will be mangled with, and it goes really across all the departments. And the thing is that sometimes the answer will be, well, okay, so let's not make a sound for it yet, let's wait until this feature grows. But surprisingly, most of the time the answer will be, well, yeah, I can start my work. I will just account for the things that will change. I will still put in systems in place. I will put in certain logics in place. I will put in sounds that maybe are reused assets of mine that I can still see what works and what not before I tackle the final quality sounds. But this is an important, really, really important part, and I'll come back to those points at the end of my talk when I'll be talking about this production trap. So bear with me. And the last thing is understanding of audio-specific issues, and I want to explain this point because a lot of my peers will, go on and on how developers, and those are usually the people that call developers clients, that they had no idea about this, that, and that, and they are just awful to work with. And it's not the cause really of the communication issue. The cause of communication issue is not that developers don't have extensive audio knowledge, is that they don't have extensive audio knowledge and audio people expect them to have such. So it's really important to communicate, and from both sides, from sound designer side, to assume that the person on the other side does not have the knowledge and the specific vocabulary may use, and the feedback will be, all abstract, so to speak. And on the other hand, just ask questions. Ask us as many questions as you need, because sometimes we'll just assume that you know something, and it's absolutely nothing wrong not knowing stuff about sound, because it's just, it's not that popular knowledge. Now, let's move on to the part where, for many of you, this will be obvious. But based on the tremendous amount of job offers I've seen for audio professionals, this has to be said. Like, audio splits between sound and music. You could do split between sound, voiceover, and music, but given the roles in game audio and the fact that no company I know has a voiceover artist on payroll, I'm splitting it into music and sound and voiceover full sound or sound. So there are people who handle sound and there are people who handle music. Those that handle sound are called sound designers. Those who handle music are called composers. Can a person be a composer and sound designer in one and do all the audio for you? Yes. Are there a lot of people like that? Quite frankly, yes. It's not uncommon that smaller companies require just one person to do all. But does it mean that they do both things equally well? Unfortunately not. Most of those people would be composers picking up sound design to keep getting jobs. And, that's kind of a trap there. But we'll talk about this later. Now, I'm not going to focus about the music side too much in this talk because thankfully my dear friend Patryk Scelina, a composer based in the same town as I, in Wrocław, we'll have a talk tomorrow about budgeting of soundtracks in game audio. And I'm sure he will cover all those very important people that stand behind composer and allow to have a really great soundtrack in your game. But under sound designer, there's still more room. It's not just the one job and every sound designer is capable of doing the same thing. Still, and the reality on the Polish audio market, most of sound designers really can do all, at least to some degree. But still, you will find some who specialize either more in the implementation side, and those are called technical sound designers. There are better recordists and better at creating assets. To the extent of, on the other end of the spectrum, there is a Foley artist who's only a person who's only recording Foley. We'll have a specialist as a voiceover editor that handles all the dialogues in the game and stuff like that if your game is big and dialogue heavy. There are also positions for audio level designer that specifically relies on person just putting sounds out there on the levels. But it depends on the dynamic of a team you have, and there might be more specialized people here, there. And now those things overlap. Those things overlap in two places. One is an audio director position, which is rare. It is rare because we don't have that many big teams, big audio teams in Poland. And the only real, I would say, audio director I know is Atsushi from CD Projekt Red. And by real, I mean the other few, like myself or Arek Tejkowski from Bluebird, we handle partially audio director responsibilities, but we still make assets, implement them to a game, and we still contribute to the game audio as specialists. Right? So audio director kind of becomes a full-time position when you have a team of around 8 members. That's the threshold, I believe, around that you really need to focus on audio directing more than anything else, and that's probably a threshold that an audio director stops providing audio for the game. And the general ratio of audio specialists for your team is between 1 for every 20 to 35 employees. So if your company is hitting 20, you'll probably need a one full-time audio professional. What if it's smaller? What if it's like 10 people? You need to bring an audio professional in the middle of the development, or is it better to bring one at the beginning of production, but only for half-time? I would say the latter, and simply because then you have a team member growing with a team. And instead of bringing sound designer or composer as late as possible, you allow his or her creations to grow with a game. And another part at the bottom of the screen that that connects sound and music is first music editor position, and this can be done either by a composer or by a sound designer. And I believe the best possible way is when it's done by a composer, and composer is the one that implements his own or her own music in the game. But at the same time, there's a multitude of examples from our industry where really, really well implemented soundtracks were created by a tandem or a team. That composer just moved those responsibilities over to the sound designer, who then handles music editing. And another thing is audio programmer, which is, from a totally different world, but still I consider an audio programmer a part of the audio team, even when this person is also part of the coding team. And this is a person that provides tools for both sound and music. So now with all that in mind, what should we do? Should we have those specialists on site, on remote? And I'm not going to touch on all the different dynamics on site and remote that are common for every other position. I'm going to talk about specifics when it comes to sound. So one thing we have to be mindful is that sound really, really, really requires workspace. Our industry, game dev industry, started from garages and basements, and there's still parts of that culture that kind of are not, not thrown away yet. And some parts of it are really positive, and some, those connected to audio, are really not. First, sound designers and composers for game audio were not trained audio professionals. They were developers who someone on the team had to handle audio, right? And some really great composers and sound designers were, I would say, shaped that way, right? But still, the idea that you can put a sound designer on open space, get him, a pair of closed headphones that cancel noise pretty well, and just let him or let her work is wrong. No, that's not the way to go. That game industry is only industry that it happens for audio professionals, and it really, really shouldn't. That's an equivalent of getting your graphic designer, giving him or her a small phone as a tablet, sitting the window with the sun rays and on the south side is right behind, and it's just terrible. It's terrible workplace. And for sound designer, and this is something that you might not realize, but working in the headphones really causes ear fatigue. And after 2-3 hours in those, you can't really make a well-informed decisions anymore based on whether you're crafting assets or mixing the game or anything like that. So this is really important to provide audio professionals with the workspace in which they can create good audio. So how does that environment work? Well, for starters, it's one sound designer, one room, not more. But I mean, not more rooms, not more sound designers in one room. That kind of defeats the purpose. Second thing, what you see here in my studio is acoustic adaptation. So the sound doesn't bounce off and, comes to my ears distorted in any fashion. I have to be able to make conscious, informed decisions about my mix and creation of assets. Another thing is studio monitors, a bunch of other equipment that I don't want to get into too much details right now. The main point is that it is expensive. So with all that in mind, what? On-site or remote? Remote, right? It's cheaper. It's much cheaper. You don't have to find space for your sound designer or composer room. You don't need to do acoustic adaptation. You don't need all that stuff. But most issues we talk about today are connected to communication. And on-site boosts communication in a tremendous, beautiful way. And it's much easier to solve some of those problems I've mentioned, and I will be talking about them further, when you have an audio specialist on site. So maybe focus on the certain positions. For composers, remote work is 100% okay. There's a lot of composers, and there's a fly in my room. There will be a cut. So let's focus on the positions. For example, for composers, there is a lot. Fucking fly. Goodness. So let's focus on the positions. For example, for composer, it's absolutely okay to work remotely. In fact, there's very few composers that hold in-house positions in game development companies. Same goes for Foley artists. But on the other hand, if you have an audio director that will serve as that communicational hub with other possibly remotely working sound designers, it's very important to have him on site. It just brings that much more out of his role and his position. Same goes for technical sound designer. There's a close relationship with a more technical part of the team, and it benefits if the technical sound designer is more on site. Now, let's talk about audio middlewares. For those of you who don't know what that is, those are like super extra plugins for audio. And they're not technically plugins, they are separate audio engines. The programs that held all the sound logic that drives sounds, that change them, the mix between the sound and music, the adaptive layering and transitions of music, all that stuff sits in the middlewares. And audio people love them so much because they make our work easier, but they are not the cheapest thing. And the question is, what are you as a developer actually paying, giving your sound designer that technology? So for start, you're saving their time. You're saving your audio team's time because they will work quicker and more efficient. But you also are saving your programmers' time. And that's usually a bigger bucks, right? Because you're saving their time both on the tools they would have to prepare for your audio team to deliver the same audio, and you're also saving your time on the optimization process because those audio engines are already, to a degree, of course, optimized. That doesn't mean there's no need for any optimization, don't get me wrong, but it still saves some of the programmer's time in that area. Then you'll get a better audio quality. It's just that. Those are really, really good audio engines, and even casting aside all the time saved, you will get a better audio quality in your game. And the last point is definitely not least, but it's the most overlooked. You'll get an access to the wider, better hiring market of audio specialists. A lot of top-tier audio specialists will not be interested working with you if you're not using middleware, because they know what hardships are connected to not using middleware, and they also want to be in that loop of top-end technology when it comes to game audio. So by using middleware, you're also getting better chances of hiring a really, really good professional for your team. Now, one disclaimer here, because before I will be talking about the pricing of two most popular middlewares, WISE and FMod. If you are using Unreal Engine, especially if you plan to using Unreal Engine 5, the audio engine in Unreal has taken leaps through the last few years, and now it's really, really good on its own. And if you have experienced sound designer in using Unreal audio engine, then middleware might not be absolutely necessary. Now, I'm not going to dive into exact details of pricing. You have that on screen. You can check that on the website if you're interested. The main difference between WWise and FMod lies in the friendliness, so to speak. So WWise is free if your production budget is less than 150K, but it's not the full version of WWise. I mean, functionality-wise, it's full, but it's limited to 500 media assets. And this is really not much. I mean, if you're making a really small game, this might be enough, but in general, it's not a lot. And FMod, on the other hand, seems to be not free under 500,000, but if your budget is under 500,000 and your revenue per year is under 200K, then it's totally free without any limits. So it's a little bit more friendly to the indies that, the small teams that are just starting out. But really above that, it's a toss-up. I myself prefer WWise, but I know people and I've heard games made on both, and both can really yield tremendous results if in the right hands. So just ask your sound designer which one you should go with. Now, the fun part, recruitment process. So I've been both on the receiving end, and I was a recruiter and I was trying to get to work somewhere. So I know it for both perspectives. And for you, as a person who will be hiring an audio professional, there are a few things to consider. First, and the first point really touches on composers, because it's really rare to find a sound designer with zero experience and no passion for game dev, but it happens among composers. And while zero experience, it's not that big of a red flag yet, because especially if you have more narrative-driven game, which does not require the crazy complicated audio system, but it still is music supporting gameplay, not music supporting linear sounds. And if that zero experience in game development is connected with a lack of passion for game dev, you're in for a long ride. I mean, this is something that you probably should skip over and move on to the next candidate. Next point regards sound designers, is probably my favorite one, because if you're hiring a sound designer, especially sound designers who want sounds, not music, you already have a composer. You'll get, for every one good CV of sound designer, you'll get 10 free jazz pianists. Why? And this is something, if you have a music reel in your sound design application, if you list experience by soundtracks you've created, and you say you're great instrumentalists here, there, and there, just move on, pick another one. Those are people that want to be composers, they feel they are composers, they want to make music for games. They apply for the job only to sneak into a composer position, and they won't be a good sound designer for you. And I know this for a fact because there's nothing wrong with people making both sound design and composing. Heck, I am that kind of person. But if you take a look at my sound designer CV, the only thing that mentions music is that I have music editing skills, which are necessary for music implementation if I would work with a composer that doesn't have such. But that's it. Then my composer CV is not really mentioning much about sound design. All right. Next two are not so red flags. I would say red flags with asterisks. So lack of technical skills. And this is only a red flag if you're hiring your first audio specialist on the team. Because let's say you have a sound designer who makes great assets and has a lot of experience in linear media. And he can be very, very valuable to the team if in the team there's someone who will offset that technical weakness of his. Because I believe that more than 50% of a game's success in terms of audio is on that implementation technical side. And if you got to make a choice between someone who's technically savvy, but his linear demos are not sounding that great as the other person who has a really great linear demo but no technical experience, pick the former. And a very good idea is to make tests for those people. And how to make tests if we don't have anyone to help us? Well, there are free projects, like for example, there's Unreal has free projects that anyone can access. Anyone can dive in, anyone can integrate WISE or FMod to those projects if necessary, and anyone can make sounds for that game, then package it and send it back to you. Of course, not for the whole game, you want to test just a part of it, but tests for both composers and sound designers should be connected to actual game engines, actual thing that they will be working with. Don't just give a trailer to score or a piece of gameplay to make sounds for. They will not give you sufficient amount of information about the technical skills of that person, and this is really, really important. And the fourth red flag, especially if we're talking remote, it's lack of communication skills. Like we've been talking about in-house versus remote, and some of those in-house benefits can be offset if the person working remotely has a really, really strong communication skills. But if they are subpar and they are on remote, you're gonna have problems. You're gonna have problems because audio is just really, really hard without good communication skills. And the next part I call not really red flags, and this is something that may be perceived by no-goes, but it's not. It's lack of previous experience with any given genre. And we have a composer who's doing orchestral hybrids on his last 3 titles, and we have something that should be, a big beat, New Orleans jazz-driven kind of soundtrack. This doesn't mean that this person cannot compose in this style. This is where we want to test it, right? Because we don't know for sure. But in most cases, composers and sound designers are really okay in switching between genres. And the second thing, pretty similar, lack of experience with certain game engine or middleware. This should only be a problem if you're looking for a composer or sound designer for the last push before the game launch, right? You have 3 months, you want to get someone who just can dive in and do this stuff. Obviously, then it's an issue. But if not, the things that really count are general knowledge and general understanding of audio processes. Either it's FMod or WISE or vanilla Unreal Engine, it doesn't really make that much difference. Last but not least, very, very important thing. There is an audio production trap, and this is apparent in the last stages of development, where audio comes in and says, well, this and that doesn't work, we need a fix for this tool, and we actually would need another tool here. What's the answer? There's no time for it. That the programmers team doesn't have time. Why? Because every single, maybe not every single, but there'll always be a task that's more important than an audio one, like the game's crashing, the frame drops, the whatever. AI is freaking out. Those are all the things that are objectively more important at the very end of development, right? If there are some broken sounds or they're not sounding as good in the end, it will make a lesser impact on Metacritic or whatever if your game just crashes. That's obvious. And at that point, there's nothing to be done. You can, as a sound designer, pull out your hair and cry the corner of your acoustically treated room, but it's not gonna change the reality. And how to tackle that problem? Well, first of all, create audio systems at the very beginning. I mean, anything that's code heavy should go right at the very beginning of development and should be prioritized and focused. The more programming heavy the feature is, the quicker should be tackled. And this should be driven both by production and by sound designers too. Now, assigning a fixed time of programming time to audio development is also a good idea, because hierarchy-wise, it might be a struggle to give as much time to the audio as the audio team needs. And, just making sure that there's either full-time audio programmer or part-time audio programmer, whether it's 3 or 1 day a week, it doesn't matter. It depends on your production needs. But it's a good idea to have that fixed time that sound designers can count that programmer will come here. It really allows us to work in a more smooth manner because we know, okay, this Friday I will have this, and that taken care of. So I can move to the other parts and not just, trying to figure out where finally programming will be able to help me. Another thing, do not leave optimizing for the end. This is really important for audio, surprisingly. And you have to do it as the project goes. And last but not least, if the game audio team is not playing the game extensively over and over again, just make them. Just keep them at their computers playing the game. The more they play the game, the better it will sound. It's as simple as that. Okay, thank you. That will be all. Before we go to a Q&A, I want to extend invitations to all you developers that have more questions and more uncertainties around game audio. You can reach out to me at the email mkorniewicz@gmail.com, and if you feel that chat with me will benefit you, please hit me up. I'll be glad to help, because I want nothing more than for the whole level of game audio in Poland to rise on another level. Thank you again.